All right. Hi, everybody. Here we are, two pals who have known each other for 31 years now. That's a long time.
Yes.
Many of you probably are not 31 years old, or possibly. So I have the privilege of knowing my great friend, Kevin Eastman, and he and I have been chatting over the last few weeks, and we realized what a great idea. Why don't we take our 3-hour chats and start translating them so that people can hear the true story behind our time together, and especially the early days of the Ninja Turtles and all of that. So, Kev, how you doing, my man?
I'm doing fantastic. It's really wonderful to join you here because it is funny that when I think about the past that we've had together, not only just from the very beginning, some of the early stages of Turtles to that. I mean, I was a stand-up guy at your wedding. You sang at my wedding. We've known each other all these years. We've intersected in our careers have intersected in many different ways, and I've watched you as bloom and blossom into so many wonderful things. And it's great that we've been able to keep in touch. And I think that was the point. I think it started when you sent a text after we did that Facebook Live where it said, watch TMNT with me when I did the podcast of watching the first Turtle movie with the fans. And you sent me a note and said, 30 years, exclamation point, WTF. And then so when we jumped on the phone afterwards, it was just suddenly we realized how much of comics history we've been through together, what we've seen, not only from the early days of, from the black and white boom and bust to the blossom of the Turtles to everything that's happened through the Tundra years and all that stuff. So I think it's a great opportunity to really tell some fantastic stories. And we'll try not to make those stories that time makes better, but the real stories.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really truth in some of the stuff that we're doing. So it's pretty exciting to me to join you and discuss. And I think out of all the things we thought we'd like to talk about, I think we both agreed the first Turtle movie was a fun place to start. You were right there in the middle when all that happened. So
yes, I was.
It's the 30th anniversary of that, right?
I was. And so here's a good thing to start with while people are getting warmed up to the idea that this is 30 years, right? So I can't believe that 30 years have gone by. I don't believe that I'm 30 years old even. And all of a sudden we realize 30 years have gone by. But one thing that we can start off with, which I think is really funny, mate, is how you and I met and what situation we were in when I first came to work for you. Because you gave me my first job in this business. I was very young. I just came over to the States from Great Britain. And I was waiting on tables.
Well, you have to first put forth that you were an aspiring, rock god. You had a band, Brave Goods. You were working your way in the music industry. You have an amazing singing voice. You'd kill it at, karaoke for as long as I've known you. But you were an aspiring musician, and Stephen Wardlaw was your main partner with the band. Yep. And so the Iron Horse Cafe was this amazing house of music in Northampton, Massachusetts on Center Street. And Iron Horse was awesome because they would bring such a wide range of college-based bands and music and blues, and it was just great. Plus the food was really good, and Mirage Studios was literally right upstairs. And so we used to go down there quite often for lunch and get to know you and be friendly with you. And I remember we go in there once, and you had been playing soccer and had injured your leg, and you were on crutches, but you were still trying to serve food. And you kind of go like, hey, I might get fired. You guys don't have any desk work.
Yep.
And that was sort of like we already liked you a lot. And so we said Cheryl Prindle was running the office at that time, and Jim Prindle. And this was still pre cartoon show and licensing. It was just on the edge of when that stuff was starting to go forward. No, it was just after the first premiere of the cartoon, so we were just doing that. So we hired you to come up and just help. And man, that was humble beginnings, right, bro?
Crazy stuff. So I come in, I've broken my leg. I can't do my job and I'm on crutches. And I said to you guys, is there any chance you could give me a job? Because I'm on crutches. And the other thing because I used to, if you remember, I used to be on crutches every other 5 minutes, right? So, I
Well,
believe
as
it was
you
you.
know,
I believe it was you that said that I could break my leg on a blade of grass. That was your saying.
we were afraid when you went out to play cards with some of your friends because you'd come into work the next day injured in some fashion. No, it was just and soccer is such an intense sport, but that was a joke that you're constantly getting hurt as
Yeah.
long as I've known you.
Yep.
But,
So I've always managed to do it. But anyway, so I came in and I started working with you guys. And then obviously, as I started, the whole licensing was taken off. And so one of the things that was taken off, as you remember, was the film, man. And I suddenly found myself in the middle of helping you guys. I was doing a lot of the production on the comic books. But one of the things that was happening to me, and we'll get into the films in a second, because that's really the big thing that we're talking about tonight. One of the big things that happened to me was that you had some issues with the guy who did the licensing. And so I helped him a lot. I spent a lot of my time working on licensing, which I
yes.
wasn't trained for. I had no idea, but I'm pretty sure that guy wasn't very trained for it either.
Well, neither were we. That was
No.
we had Cheryl who ran the office, who was an amazing, lovely, and adorable person.
Yep.
Rest in peace. But she was legally blind. We had her
Yep.
husband that sort of helped, and he was just helping. It was sort of like we didn't know what to expect as things started growing and blossoming. So we just sort of it's like, okay, you help with that, and then that's around the time that you arrived. That we were sort of all learning together, and I think that was
Right.
that was a cool part of it.
And it was pretty crazy, man. It was a crazy time. And so we were just learning how to do all this stuff. None of us knew what to do, but I'll always stand behind the way that you and Pete ran it, because immediately for me, the one thing that I felt was always true was that you guys were the most humble of any of the people that were involved. Right. And when I first met you, you said, you didn't say, I'm a famous guy, or I'm really rich, or I've got stuff going on. You sort of went, yeah, I grew up in Portland, Maine. And Pete used to do cartoons for a local newspaper. And that's how you two conducted each other yourselves. Whereas a lot of other people around us, if you remember, there were plenty of people with some really big egos. And that was pretty crazy, right?
Well, it's tough because and I understand exactly what you're saying, but it is one of those things that the old adage of be wary of meeting your heroes. Sometimes you could be disappointed, but I remember for Peter and I that we were tuned in to the giants we stood on the shoulders of, guys like Jack Kirby and people that inspired us. And I just remember to this day, and it's something I will often tell at my panel when I do conventions, was my first meeting with Jack Kirby, which was just this whisper. It was like 1986, one of the first times we went to San Diego Comic-Con, and Kirby's in the house, Kirby's here. And so Peter and I sort of dropped everything we ran over. By the time that we got to where Kirby was, he'd already had a large crowd of people around him, and he was just finishing telling a story how he and Joe Simon created Captain America. And the fan next to the fan that obviously asked that question was so nervous, he asked the same question again. Kirby answered the same question without, didn't give him an eye roll, didn't give anything. He just answered it with the same loving passion, intensity of what him and Joe Simon did when they created Captain America. That I just love that. Man, if I ever get fans, I hope they treat them as well as Jack Kirby treats his fans, because he really loves what he's doing, and that was such a moment. And so we felt very privileged that as self-publishers and things that had the fan following they did, that we were able to control all aspects of our creation, much like the movie. By the time we got to the movie, we had done, the cartoon series had ran for 2 years at that point. The toy line was blossoming, and it was very successful. And so they kept saying, the next level before we completely go out of business and end up all of those turtle toys in the discount bin, was we have to do a live action movie. Pete and I immediately had this horrific look on our face, like remembering all those bad Marvel adaptations from the early days, like the New World Cinema that did some of those Captain America and Fantastic Four, and they were terrible. And so we were just worried that, how can you pull off a movie and make this work in something that's so fantastical? It was amazing it worked as a comic book, because that's a different medium and a different format. The fact that it could transition into animation, which is also a drawn media, that made a lot of sense, because it was a close relationship, and then the toys were sort of an addition to that. But how do you pull off a live action movie? And that was the thing that we were probably the most scared about at that time, is how we pull that off.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, those movies, I mean, you look at them now, you think about it, man. Look at all the effort and all the time and all the things that were done in those films, right? That was incredible. Like we were in, you know, we were right in the firing line of the movie industry, because one of the things that was new to us was that, you know, we didn't know what that industry was. We found out to our cost at times how crazy the movie industry is. So it kind
Yeah,
of gave
no,
us the bug to do movies, but it also drove us crazy, right?
yeah, it
Um,
was. No, that's so right, Paul, because it was like, you know, and I attribute it to, or relate it to us going into the direct comic book distribution business. We were clueless. We didn't know how it worked. We didn't understand completely. We were originally intending to just sell single copies through mail order, through ads and a comic buyer's guide. And so once we understood that universe, and you apply that concept of understanding that universe and how to work within it, animation was a completely different planetoid universal system, which was completely different from toys. And the movies were a whole other, like, what the WT, you know, it's like, you know, nothing made sense. And when you approach a movie project, I mean, even in the early days of, there were two producers, Kim Dawson and Graham uh, Cottle, I think is, I hope I'm not mispronouncing it.
yeah.
I don't ever recall meeting these guys as producers, but apparently they were having conversations with other film companies in Hollywood trying to get this movie sold and talking to an agent without Peter and I sort of knowing it. And then by the time it sort of arrived as an opportunity in our landscape, we were immediately nervous and concerned of um, the control of the rights, because we felt like we were lucky with the comic book because we controlled those rights. It was just Peter and I. We were very lucky, and we went in, and it was actually, we were a bit cocky when we went into the animation development and the toy development, because we said, you know, we understood what happened to some of the creators that came before us, that they did not have the say or the control or be able to exercise their vision of their characters nor profit from them. And so we were adamant, and like I said, we were kind of cocky, so we were paying our rent from comic books, so we were very adamant that we control those rights and have approval over those rights. And so that was important when we entered the movie landscape, and people thought we were just crazy. And Pete and I were like, we don't care. You think we're crazy. We want to protect the integrity of our characters. And so
Yeah.
that was where the development started. We met a guy named Tom Gray, who is lead producer. I know we've got some great Tom Gray stories.
We have some good Tom Gray stories.
that you and I have together that we share. Because again, you know, that's the thing is, you know, I keep thinking of, I'm jumping ahead because I'll go back to the origins, but one of my favorite moments was going to the London premiere with you and Nan, who I love and adore. She was,
Yeah.
she was great. And that was a fantastic adventure all in itself, and surreal, because I think that was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was my first trip to London ever, was when we went to that premiere. Yes.
Yeah, crazy. And so we'll get into all of that, man, because we got a bunch to talk about, and it's not just the stuff that happened in public, although what happened in public was incredible. People don't realize now that when that first movie came out, and I remember this like it was yesterday, that there were kids lined up around the block across the country. I mean, you couldn't get into a movie theater the day that it came out, and you couldn't get in for the first 2 or 3 weeks. There were just lines around the block. And I can't remember before, maybe Star Wars, but I can't remember since a single time where people have lined up for a movie like they lined up for that Ninja Turtle, the first one especially, you know?
No, that was, you know, and I think that was like, because people, you know, will ask, you know, and it came up even in a lot in the early days when people go like, you know, hey, you designed this concept because you knew it was going to be a huge kids property, and you knew it was going to be this, that, and the other thing. And Pete and I were just like, no, we a couple of goofy kids living in New England, and we had such passion to want to be in the comic book business, to tell and write and draw, you know, imagine ourselves as a Jack Kirby. That it just came from such an innocent place of, you know, we just want to do comic books, we want to tell stories. And so the fact that any of it had worked before was amazing in itself. So when you stand in the middle of it and watch, you know, hit these box office milestones and things like that after you work through it, which a lot of people that looked at it initially said, this is never going to work. Kids are going to hate this. And this just makes no sense. It's the end of the franchise. And Peter and I were like, well, we think it's pretty good. We think it's pretty good. And then when they start lining up and you just go that Talking Head song. It's like, how did we get here? This is amazing.
How did we get here? There were some surreal moments. So let's talk about the first movie, man, because we just went past. When I saw this the other day, I texted you because I was a bit surprised that it was 30 years, but of course it has been 30 years. That first movie, man, it was almost like it was happening around us. I remember that. I remember you guys running out the door quite often. And it was a really good filmmaker that made it, disregarding the fact that at the time, the production company were a small production company, Golden Harvest, and they had done a bunch of ninja films like with, who was their main star? They were a small company. They had...
it was their biggest hits were Jackie Chan based movies. They were most famous for Police Story and things like that. But there was the main parent company's Golden Harvest, was a Hong Kong based company, but Tom Gray was their Hollywood executive that was representing them. And I think that when a couple of the producers had shown it to Tom, he thought they were crazy, but when he sort of really kind of tuned in and looked at it, he felt that, what's amazing is that they have some of the best stunt men in the world, the best stunt men and women in the world, the stunt artists. And he felt that, with the right costuming, with that kind of stuff, we could make this film and do the action the way it should be done and this stuff. So he saw a lot of possibility. And I think even then he was thinking, which was a lot of money back then, was like, $2.5 million film, low budget, shot in Hong Kong and then released in the States. And that was sort of the spark and the seed that started it. And there was a writer that we engaged with early on that Pete and I didn't feel got it the way we wanted them to get it. And then we had this discussion with Tom Gray, and he said, well, you really need to meet the director, this guy, Steve Barron, who at that time was just legendary. And the music video business, he did, Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, he did Dire Straits' Money for Nothing, that Aha video that was so fantastic with all the comic book illustrations. And so Pete and I met Steve Barron. He flew out to Northampton, and he showed up at the first meeting with there he is, my brother Steve. This is a great picture. We would always keep in touch. We had a long relationship with different interactions, and I can't remember the year, and I apologize. This was they decided to show the first Turtle movie on a large inflatable screen to 3,000 fans to kick off the Tribeca Film Festival. And again, I can't remember exactly what year, but Steve was going to be there, and they wanted me to come out. And what was great was, we get to hang out together. We sat in the audience with the fans and watched the movie again, and it was both the first time either of us had seen it on the big screen. So it was pretty awesome moment.
Yeah. Yeah, Steve was a good guy. He was a really talented guy, and I know that you and Pete, but you especially, you used to talk about how great he was when the film was getting made. I remember you saying all the time, "I think this guy's really clever. I think this guy's really good," and you were really waxing lyrical about Steve and his work. And the craziest part of this was that he got let go from the film, didn't he?
Oh yeah, we'll jump to that in a second, but I'll lead up to it because one of the things that was fantastic about Steve is Steve was a visualist. He was, he wasn't a comic book artist, but he loved comics intensely. He had that visual sense, not only what you could tell what he did with mixing mediums and live action and animation and these different sequences, and his work on the Jim Henson storyteller episodes and stuff, which really brought that whole universe together. And we'll dip into that in a second. But he showed up at that first meeting with the original 600-page collection that Peter and I did. It had the first 15 issues we did together, which was basically issues 1 through 11 plus the one one shots of each of the turtles. So, and he had gone through and he postmarked parts of issue 1, parts of the Leonardo one shot issues 10 and 11, and he just sort of said, the story's here, and you've already sort of storyboarded it, and the visuals are there, and I think I can take these strong beats and these strong structures built around these absurd characters, which still are just a family at the heart and soul of it. That they just want to be teenagers. They want to be honor their father. They want to respect it. They just want to be kids at heart, kind of like Peter Parker in the sense that I just want to be a teenager and I'm in high school, but I'm also Spider-Man. So he got all those isms, and the first person he hired to help him develop it were 2 people. One was Todd Langdon to help write the script, and Todd was most famous for his amazingly beautiful work on the Wonder Years. And then he hired a comic book artist from the UK, Brendan McCarthy, who's just a fantastic comic book genius, who's did so many early comics we all love, like Paradox and Freak Wave and that kind of stuff. And more recently, Brandon basically sort of wrote, created, designed, and evolved the whole Mad Max Fury Road movie that came out. So Steve was a visualist, and he got it. And the key to Steve coming into it was convincing Jim Henson to be part of the project, which was difficult in that Jim Henson's work was really rooted in many sort of preschool or young kids kinds of concept, Fraggle Rock and things like that came later, sort of part of that, and even the Dark Crystal. But he was able to convince Jim to join the series. Yeah, it's such a great shot. It was, the sets in North Carolina, but look at that.
Isn't that great?
But, when Jim came on board, that was something that gave Peter and I such an extraordinary level of comfort, because Steve had the same concerns. He brought those up early on, where he said, if we can't put these characters on screen where people feel like they can reach out and touch them and believe that those eyes and the emoting and the acting and everything they're doing, if it doesn't come off as real, then we've lost before we get the first person in the door. And that was Steve's vision, and Jim Henson and his Creature Shop's vision that pulled it all together. And even, I don't know if a lot of people know that Brian Henson, Jim's son, was second unit director on the movie. I met Brian for the first time on the set,
yeah.
And then if you want me to, you want to tell about what happened with Steve at the end of the?
Yeah, tell everybody what happened, because it was frustrating to everybody. I think he was so great. I'll show you a few more pictures as we go through. Yeah, tell everybody what happened with Steve, because Steve was great, and I know you were so disappointed when he was let go.
It was frustrating, and again, I can't claim to know every single detail, because Hollywood, again, look at that. That's a great picture. They literally built those costumes full size, and once they had the original scale of what they needed the turtles to be, they would then cast an actor to play a certain turtle character, and then build the suit around him. So when the actor moved, the muscles moved, and so many things like that. As well as there were moments like important moments, like back in those days, you had to have all these servos and connectors in the early years of puppetry to make all those eyes moves and the facial expressions that was ran by a puppeteer off screen. Those all had to be built, but luckily the actors that were doing the acting, they had this giant turtle shell that they could hide the machinery to make them work. But Steve, through the process of filming the movie under an incredibly tight budget, a very short schedule, and filming in the hottest months of the year in Wilmington, North Carolina. I mean, we were down there many times throughout the end of June, July, and August when they were shooting, when it was like 98 degrees and 100% humidity kind of stuff, and the actors were practically passing out in some cases, wearing those heavy suits while still doing spin kicks and martial arts movement, with 80-pound rubber latex suits on. So as Steve built the vision and the pieces that he wanted, he felt that if he had a little bit more money and if he had a little bit more time and could do some more on-site shooting, especially in New York City, that he felt it would just, it's such a strong film that it could be a stronger film. And so, again, my understanding is he did talk to some other possible companies if they would come in and put more money into the film, which Golden Harvest, then, it was, the relationship was becoming strained anyway, so they eventually they let him go. The film had been completely shot. He was completely through all of his editing. They let him go at the very end, which was heartbreaking and devastating to both Peter and I, because we loved Steve so much, and we loved it was his vision that made that film, which is to this day the best turtle film ever made. Great, the best turtle film ever made across the board, and will always be the greatest. So
Yeah,
we supported him. We were devastated as well.
Now, I agree about that, but what I will say is that in all of this, obviously, there was also one obviously difficult part was Jim Henson was working on our film.
Oh my goodness!
And then he passed away, and that was a sad story because there are different versions of it, and the one that I've heard that I believe makes the most sense was that Jim wasn't a guy that would go to the doctor, and he had like walking pneumonia, and he just wouldn't go to the doctor for his own reasons. He had reasons to not go, and so he unfortunately had walking pneumonia, and it kind of took him by surprise. It took everybody by surprise. So that was really sad, man. And I remember when they told us in the offices. Remember when we got the news and we were like, "What?"
Yeah, it was like crying. It was like very, because it was we grew up on Jim Henson. We loved him, although we've never met him. And I only had one very brief meeting with him, and it was on set. And I know we have a picture in there, I think, somewhere. But I had a very brief meeting with him when he came on set, because he used to fly his own plane, and so he came down from New York. From what I recall, he flew to set to pick up Brian, and they were going to go to Florida for a family event. And then so he came to set visit. We get to chat and talk, and that was just one of the highlights. There, it's like we were on set. It's like there's me saying something stupid and him pretending to be interested. But no, look at the puppeteer right next to him.
Yeah.
But anyway, unfortunately, that he did have a walking pneumonia, and then unfortunately got sick. And then by the time he ended up back in New York, it had gone too far, and we lost him in the middle of the film. And that was just one of those things that it was very sad. Really, it took one of the coolest moments of my life and Peter's life, and made it such a tragic event, because we lost somebody that was a legend to us. And then
yeah. Now in all of this, right? Obviously, it was still incredible. And one thing before we continue, I just want to do this because we haven't had a chance to do this yet. I just want to thank everybody for coming on board and joining us, because this is the stuff, right? This is half of what Kevin and I are going to talk about are things that people have never really heard before, because those early days with the Ninja Turtles were incredible. Really, really fun time. But there was difficult stuff. There was stuff that we were learning. But let's get into some of the cool stuff, man, because I just want to say before we do, Stephanie and George, Jay, everybody that's joined in, thank you so much. We are seeing your notes, and we're going to answer a few questions as we go along. So we will get into this stuff. What we would ask you to do, if you mash the like button over there, if you actually push the like button, it helps us to bring more people in, and so more people know that we're talking, and we get a bigger community. So go ahead and like that. You see Meta, our company, going, smash the like button. That's why they do this, apparently, so that people join in. Anyway, if you're
watching, that's what's so much fun about this conversation, because this is I feel like this is the kind of stuff when we talk on the phone. It's like, hey, you remember that time that? It's like, so this is just which I thought your idea of having two friends chat makes so much sense. But we really sort of zeroed down on the things that we could discuss, and the things we will discuss as these things go on. Is that we cover a tremendous amount of comic book history, not only turtle history, comic book history in our old and graying ages,
Look at
and
my white
ages
beard.
of great wisdom and importance and stuff. No, but I think that besides just having some great anecdotes and some behind the scenes stuff that fans have never heard, which excited us that we could share that, but also there's some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'd like to tell things from my perspective sometimes because, I was really young, man. You gave me my first job in this business. I was a kid, right? And the next thing I know, I'm in the middle of the biggest licensing phenomenon of all time. We had a guy that was supposed to be doing the licensing, but he wasn't really doing much. And so I ended up finding myself in the middle of like doing licensing stuff. And we'll get to that at some point because obviously next time we're going to talk about the toys and the cartoons, and some of those toys and some of that crazy licensing stuff is incredible. The behind the scenes story. Let me tell you from my perspective, one of my coolest days, and it's actually something that I tweeted recently and it got a lot of affection. There was a moment when we did the premiere in Northampton. So we're kids. I mean, I'm a kid. You're a kid, man. You're young, and that those dimples and the moustache were brilliant. I only think of you ever as the way that I met you when and I remember sitting in that premiere and it was our hometown. So we were all sort of there and we were all excited. And there was a moment that was really emotional. And that was when it came up and it said Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird. And I was sitting right with you. And I sort of looked at you and everybody was just cheering and saying, look at what we did, right? Like, it's us. Like, that's Kevin and Pete. They're right there. They're our mates. That was really brilliant, wasn't it? Just to think, was that the bit where you suddenly realized, holy crap, I've made something that might be bigger than I even realized, because the movie changed an awful lot of stuff.
It did. The movie, the success of the movie of what Steve and Jim and everybody accomplished with it, Jim Henson, what everybody accomplished with the movie was it put it on a whole different level. It was, whatever records and things that it set, but it was more all about the fans because, Courtney and I travel a lot. We do about 15 to 20 shows a year. And one of the most amazing things that we see constantly and consistently are those, say, comfortably 28 to 34-year-old fans, and it can go a little lower, more later, is that that movie was the first movie that they ever went to in their life. Yep. That they said, the first movie I, pitched a fit and got my parents to take me to was Turtles #1, and it changed their life. And I remember, my anecdote is back to them, is I remember my first movie in a movie theater was Planet of the Apes, and that changed my life. And I think that was probably a spark of where the Turtles came from. But it was one of those things that we wanted to do this premiere in Northampton because it was our home. It was the home of the Turtles. We were just, Pete and I would go get coffee together or ice cream and the artist and yourself, and we'd eat and lunch. And this was our hometown. So to most other people, and even after the movie premiere, most other people, it was like, oh, it's just Kevin and Peter. They just a couple of guys, but they didn't quite understand the phenomenon that was building when the movie came out. So the Academy of Music was in downtown Northampton, and so we convinced New Line Cinema to let us do a premiere there. It was still, I think it was on a Thursday, and the movie opened the next day on Friday. And it was mainly just for us and all the people that we knew, whether it be friends and family, the people that helped us work through the whole series together. But it was just a celebration for us and the city that we lived in. So we had a lot of tickets. It was a free event. We gave tickets out left, right, and center to anybody that we could to have this, to share this event. And it was amazing. And it was still, when you looked at that event, it was still before the movie opened. The movie just as easily could have bombed the next day, or could have, just been a complete failure. So that night to us was just a wonderful event that we get to share with the people that we cared about the most. And that was
yeah. Cool. Actually, I remember the fear. I remember the fear a little bit. I remember when the first movie was going to come out, and a lot of the talk in the office over at Mirage was, what if it bombs? There was a consideration,
Yeah, there was a lot of, there were people that like, because there's always like, if anything becomes successful, I think there's a lot of critics that
Yeah.
want to offer their perspective, and maybe you should have done this and maybe you should have done that. And then, even as you went on to um, even like the second movie, which became more of a live action cartoon version, we thought was a very well done first movie, which was mixed for the elements of the first comic book and the first cartoon show, so it was for both audiences and that kind of thing. But again, going back to the center, which is sort of, Pete and I had no experience. We didn't know, quote unquote, what we were doing, but we went with our instincts, and those instincts were, much like we approach the comic books, is try to tell the best story you can in the best way you can, and make it work for you as a person, and hopefully that'll resonate, because there's no other barometer. If you're writing materials like, you as a writer, Paul, and the incredible amount of stuff you've done, you're not writing, in my opinion, you probably have taken the same approach. You're not writing for your fan base. You're writing for what you'd like to see in a story, where it makes sense to you as a story, and how it works as a story. And so that's how we approached each of those things, because we had no preference. But there was really, even in the early days, Mark Friedman was our main licensing agent, who helped choreograph the animated series and the toys, and eventually the movie, that worked with Peter and I. Said, if you have a successful launch of an intellectual property, you'll have an introductory year, and if that works, you'll have a successful second year, and then the third year you're basically in a discount bins. And so save every penny, be very careful, and don't go crazy. But just, this is you've got about a 3-year arc in this thing before people forget that the turtles were ever a thing. So we were very aware of that. So.
Yeah, that when we get into this, as we go on in different ones, we're going to start telling some of the crazies, right? Because there were some crazy stories about, licensing and all that kind of stuff. And I remember just even the one thing that I've always admired about what you and Pete did, and what we insisted on as a group, was that we said the standard of the artwork has to be good. And I can remember that people would try to cheat, and they would try to not do high standard. But ultimately, what you and Pete did, even though you didn't know what you were doing, like you say, you kind of did, because it was your creation, and you wouldn't let anybody do anything that was crap, right? Now, when it came to dealing with Hollywood, there would be times when they would try really hard to make crap anyway. And I'm going to get into some of my personal anecdotes, because I was around the second movie a little more, and that one I think was a bit of a challenge. But let me tell you one anecdote from my perspective. So when this movie came out, my little cousin Bill, he was 5 years old, and he came over to America, and you couldn't see it in Great Britain, right? So it was the first week of the Ninja Turtles, and I took him to the movie, and I'm like his cousin, I'm his big cousin, and he gets to see the Ninja Turtles, and he loves them, right? Remember, they were called the Hero Turtles in Britain because ninjas were illegal at the time, right? Which is crazy. And he sat on my lap, and every time Leonardo threw a punch, he threw a punch with him. I can remember him squirming because he's living inside Leonardo, right? And then, obviously, in the film, when one of the Ninja Turtles gets hurt in that first film, it almost killed him. He was worried, and he sat on my lap, and he was so worried that the Ninja Turtle was going to die, or is he going to be okay? And I realized, even just as a creator, even now, that had such a profound effect on me, watching a character that was a created character that we knew was created, and yet to him, it was completely real. So I would imagine that your audience and the people that grew up with the Ninja Turtles, like, they would know over time, they would go like, that was as real to me as anything when I was a kid. For us, it wasn't just, it was a job, but I suppose for you,
that's it. No, I love it. It's just made me think of like that story you told me about those nightmares you used to have about the Doctor Who, the Daleks?
Yes, I did. Yes.
The evil robots you thought were coming to get you when you were a kid.
Yeah. I was really scared of Daleks. I couldn't sleep. I never have been able to sleep, but I used to be terrified of Daleks because I thought they were real. So, yeah, that was pretty crazy. But it taught me about.
But it's funny because it was.
Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say that the furtherance, just what you said, is that's probably one of the greatest joys when Courtney and I do shows. I've seen moments where a male boyfriend, husband, significant other, and the spouse would come to a show and they'd have a toy or a dog-eared comic book or something that they've saved for 30 years, or they would have they would come up in there and they'd get emotional and they'd be like, when I was a kid, I wore the Michelangelo Halloween costume 3 years in a row, and the fact that they would put this item down in front of me to sign and they say, I'm sorry, this is all I have for you to sign. And I go, you can't imagine how incredibly awesome it is that you not only shared that story with me, but you brought me something that you kept all these years. You kept something for 25 or 20 years that meant that much to you. It could have easily been discarded and easily thrown away. But I love that moment. And so Courtney would sort of like watch the wife or significant other watching the boyfriend go, I've never seen this person before, because he's perverted back to a 6-year-old fan. And it's such a precious and awesome moment. But,
it's incredible.
Yeah, so
one of the things that I know was a big favorite of yours was and this was really cool in the movie, was Casey Jones getting in the movie, right? Because I know that that's a character that you really loved. I found Elias Koteas at the time when he was in that role. I was like, man, that guy is Casey Jones, isn't he? I loved him personally. I hope you did too, because I thought Casey in that first movie was just incredible. And I know it was a character that you loved. So you got to think of an idea. You had a character that you loved. Next thing you know, he's like part of this giant movie thing. That's pretty incredible, right?
Well, that was, and that goes back to, with all heartfelt love and respect to the incredible Steve Barron, is that, there are scenes that, like when, the turtles are going up the stairs to April's apartment in the second time around shot. That's right out of the comic books that Peter and I drew. It is the scenes where Leonardo's sort of thrown through the window. I mean, he checked those comics, the whole battle, the second time around shot, the outside of the second time around shot. So many things that he pulled right from the comics and said, this works, and this is why it works. So he played on those visuals, and we love that because, when Casey was created, it was 1995. Look at that. That was like when we built the second time around shot. That was just such an incredible thing to us, because again, they didn't belittle, like, you guys know comic books and you do your little comic booky thing, but we're Hollywood guys. No, it was like Steve was so smart that recognized that there's this meat and there was intent and there's heartfelt. There's, on set, and that was July in Wilmington, that they shot that whole scene in the park, which was one of those favorite scenes that Pete and I did in the Raphael one shot. And they expanded on it and really had a lot of great moments of the added to it. But they didn't just buy a cheap hockey mask off the shelf for Casey's mask. They built his mask to match what we did in the comic books. And then when we met Elias, it was like, it was one of those things that still gives me goosebumps. When we met him, it's like, you were the perfect Casey Jones. And he was really kind of stressed because he was like, I love this character, and I just hope I'm doing a good job. And Pete and I were just like, oh my God, this is like, when you imagine, and you've done the same, you create characters. When you imagine the voice that brings your character to life, or makes it move and emote and act, this is better than we ever imagined. And he by far, and I think it's unanimous with all of our fans. He was and will always be the greatest.
He was incredible. He was incredible.
Actually, it's funny anecdote. Just you get a kick out of this.
Yeah, having him as that person, I think, was really good. And then, so let's talk a little bit about what happened once we got into the film, because the film was a massive success, and now all of a sudden, you guys, you're total rock stars. There's all the toys and the licensing. It was almost like the thing that tied everything together. You had the cartoon, you had the toys, everything was going really well, but all of a sudden, here comes the movie, and it's a cultural phenomenon. And now the world is looking at this thing. And so at one point, we all went over and we went to the premiere in London, right? So there are some pretty cool stories that happened over there. but I'll get us started. So we go over, and at the time, you know, I was a single guy and I'd never been to a premiere before. And so everybody sort of had their wives and girlfriends and everybody looked beautiful, right? And my family are not really out there, and I'm just a kid. And so I took my grandmother to I took
Your lovely, awesome Nan. Your Nan.
I took my little
I love
Nan,
her. I miss her.
who was a wonderful human being, my little Nan. She was lovely. And I took her to the premiere of the film, right? So what happened to my Nan was that they went to her neighborhood where she lived, little old lady, and they picked her up in a limousine. And I don't think there had ever been a limousine in that neighborhood, right? So apparently all the old people are looking out the window like, what's going on with the, you know, Mrs. Eldridge, right? And they pick up my Nan, they bring her to the premiere, and we get in the limo, and now they drive us all up. And we arrive on the red carpet, and everybody gets out, and you guys look fabulous, and you're all like, hey, it's the creators of the Ninja Turtle. And I get out with my Nan, and I'm like, come on, Nan, she's a really little old lady. And she started waving at everybody like the Queen, which I thought was brilliant. So it was so great.
She looked like the Queen.
She looked like the Queen, didn't she?
She looked like the Queen, and she talked like one of the like John Cleese or Michael Palin in drag. Like, oh, it's a penguin on the TV. Your Nan was so lovely.
She was
because it was the premiere was at the. I loved her so much, but it was like the premiere was amazing because it was at the Odeon, which is help me. It's not Leicester Square, which is what's the big square? It's up from.
It was the Leicester Square Odeon. Yeah, it was the Leicester Square Odeon.
Italy.
Yeah.
Yeah, Leicester Square. And so that was an amazing thing because again, that was we touched on for a second earlier, which was my first trip to London, which still to this day is one of my favorite cities. But it was just one of those things that I was, because I could never imagine. You put into perspective that it's amazing that any of this had worked before, and the fact that it was this hit in the United States. It was like, this is a bad comparison, and I don't want you to think I'm being egotistical. It's like what I imagine, like, because I'm a huge Beatles fan. It's like the Beatles were a huge success before they arrived here in the States. Back in those days, movies that opened here, it would be 6 months or 7 months before we'd open those movies in foreign territories. So by the time that premiere was going on, look at that, there she is.
Look
how young you look. Oh my god.
Look at how long
look at those bangs that I have. Holy.
Look at us, right? So look, this is the Kevin that I know. It's the Kevin I always remember, of course, is you with that mustache. That's how I met you. And you were so kind to my grandmother, right? Because she's a little old lady. Look at me. I'm 21 years old, I think. And here we are on the night of the premiere. We take my grandmother into the premiere, and it's loud as hell, remember? Right? It's really loud and pretty violent. And so there's stuff kicking off everywhere, and there's lights going off. My Nan comes in. And then my favorite part of this, Kev, has to be that we got to the end of the film, and I thought, well, my Nan's going to be really tired because she's old. And the BBC asked us to an after party. I think you went to this after party, but I'm not sure. So we took my grandmother to an after party, and there were all these celebrities there, like Queen were there, Elton John was there. And I'll never forget the moment that Brian May from Queen came over and said to me, young man, I hear that you brought your grandmother. And I said, yeah, you're mad, and he went, that's tremendous. I'm going to bring my mum next time I come. And like all of the celebs were just loving on my grandmother. And I thought, this is really cool because my Nan was the center of everybody's attention, which was so cool. I love that.
She was like, you want to put your Nan in your pocket and bring her home and keep her safe and precious forever. But it was no, I was like the after party. The thing was like much like everything else that was going on at the time. I was a huge Pretenders fan, and that was the thing because you put the relationship of what Steve Barron meant to a lot of these musical artists. not only just directed this amazing film, but he was the go-to guy for music videos. And so I remember meeting Chrissy Hynde, and I was a huge Pretenders fan. It was one of those moments where you just went like, I couldn't say anything that wasn't going to be embarrassing to myself. But it was, you sort of look at this thing that was happening, and it was like you're floating above yourself and looking at something that you don't feel like you sort of were really there. And it was such, and that's and as I related that to the going to the premiere of the Turtles in Paris, and the same thing. And it's like the first time I'd ever been to Paris, and I'm standing there, looking at the Eiffel Tower, and here's one of those circular movie or promotional things they put up in the Sea and Turtles poster there, and it just, was such a fan of the city and artwork and all this stuff, but none of this makes sense because this is not real. This is some bizarre fantasy. I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm going to be cooking lobsters at the Wolverine restaurant.
Right. Right. It's how I met you, man. I remember that when I first met you, you said to me, I'll never forget it because I always try to carry myself this way. You went, I'm just a lucky guy that cooked lobsters in Maine, and I got really lucky. And that's not always true, by the way. The fact that you carry yourself like that is part of the reason why you got lucky, because you're humble about it. But yeah, having that humility will always stand you in good stead. Because if you believe the press, then you would have been the hugest human being in the world, and then it just would have killed you, right? But instead, you and Pete especially were really humble about it. And it was hard to be humble when you got lights flashing at you and like celebrities coming all over you and just going like, man, you're the greatest thing I've ever seen in my life. And I love the Ninja Turtles. And, it was hard to be humble. So I always thought that story about my nan going to the premiere was great because she kind of grounded everybody on that evening, didn't she? She's like a little old lady. And you and April were really good about like looking after her and making sure she was okay and then just sending her on her way, which is really nice, So that was, I always remember that. That was so cool.
Very surreal.
I had
to tell one funny.
Go ahead, man. Yeah.
I want to tell one story because I have to tell this because it's one of my favorites. Again, it's years after the premiere, and I remember you would we'd talk quite often about everything, and then it'd be like every time I talk to you, you'd always remind me that I talked to my nan the other day, and she said, "Make sure you say hello to Kevin." I'd make sure they would say hello. But I remember we were working on another project together, and we'll get to this later on, but we were working on the project together, and we were staying in LA at this hotel, and we flew all day. We arrived, checked in, and you were particularly tired, so we went off to bed, and then I went to the hotel bar to just have a nightcap, and Terry Jones from Monty Python was there.
That's right.
And I grew up, I used to stay up late on a school night to watch Monty Python on public TV, and so I did something I never do because I always sort of was very scared and I'd keep my distance. But I paid for his tab. It was just him and a friend of his sitting. So he comes over and such a awesome. He goes, I don't understand. Thank you. And I said, I'm Kevin Eastman, my friend of the Ninja Turtles. I'm a huge fan. And he was such an awesome guy. We had this wonderful conversation for probably 15, 20 minutes, and then. I felt I had annoyed him enough, so he went to bed. And so the next morning when we met for breakfast, I was like, "Paul, you blew it. We had this great conversation with Terry Jones, and you went to bed and you missed it." And that's like walking through the breakfast place, Terry Jones walks up to the table and he goes, "Hi, Kevin." And Paul looks over and goes, "You just moved in next door to my nan." And I was like,
I want to be clear about it. It was actually by my mom. My mom, who's a little old lady now. He moved into mid-central Wales in Llanidlos, which is in the middle of nowhere. And 1 week before we had flown out to LA, my mum had called me coincidentally and said, "You never guess who moved in next door to me? Terry Jones from Monty Python," right? And a week later, and if you remember, we arrived in the Northridge earthquake, so the ground was still trembling. The place was crazy.
That's right.
And you met Terry Jones and you brought him in to meet me, and you were so excited because he was your hero. And I said, "Hello, Terry, you live next door to my mum." And then he was like,
then suddenly I was as invisible as a salt shaker.
That's right. I don't know if you've ever forgiven me for this, Kevin, because ultimately he really wanted to talk to me because he loved Llanidlos, but he didn't really like Los Angeles. So he's like, "Oh, let's talk about home." And It's just the
Oh, wow.
craziest,
I always
most
thought
surreal moment.
that was your dad.
Yeah, no, it wasn't my nan, but I think you probably put it with my nan because my nan was, you knew my nan. Let me tell you the funniest thing about my nan. So, for all the people that are watching, Kevin is really kind, right? And he's really sweet. So, he'll never let you know this. Like, I know been my mate for so long. So, I'll talk nicely about you. Kevin is always really kind, and my nan was really impressed with Kevin. So, what would happen is I would call my nan from America and I'd say, "Hey, Nan, how's it going?" And the first thing she would always say to me is, "Hi, Paul, how's Kevin?" It was like you were her grandson. So
That's
I
so
would never
funny.
be able to talk to her until I had said, "Kevin's doing great. Thanks very much. Everything's good. He sends his regards. I'll make sure that I say hi to him for you." And then she would talk to me. So you were like her favorite grandson, basically.
That was lovely. Well, that's
She was
awesome.
great.
Great.
Let's talk about a couple of the surreal moments in the filmmaking, right? Because there were some surreal moments. If I were to pick out the most surreal moment for you, or you could think about it, what do you think is the most surreal stuff? Because I got a couple, but what do you think is the most surreal moment for you?
Regarding the first film, are you thinking of looking at all three
All of them, all of them. What
films?
was the
This is
moment to you that was the most surreal part of just being involved in this? And tell me a good one. Come on.
oh, dude. Well, Josh, it's like any memories that we have of the first film, we're just whether it's painted differently now, but they were just beautiful. I just felt like it was. There were sad moments. There were difficult things, whether Steve being go, and then the passing of Mr. Henson, and so many things. But there was to us that was a perfect film, and what made it interesting was as we completed that and it had that success. Of course, they had to the second film right away, and so Peter and I were again very adamant and very much that we felt that the control aspect that we had in these films was part of the success because again we're not I'm not claiming it, but we felt that it was the right people that understood the story and the concept, and they made a great film. So we felt, why try to fix something that's not broken? So this was how we approached the second film and the development and the writing of that. And so, if you read the screenplay for the second film versus what you actually saw, they're quite different. The parent companies felt that there were too many criticisms of the film being overly violent and those kind of things. And so they try to make it more like a live action cartoon. Now, to Peter and I, again, because I've heard from a lot of fans that Secret of the Ooze is one of their favorite Turtle films, was a lot like the cartoon. The Turtle, us, like, the Turtles never used their weapons. We lost the martial arts basis. There were problems with, how the two evil Razor, which should have really been in hindsight, which is always 2020. It should have been Bebop transitioned out of that to create new characters to build up the Turtle universe, which we were excited about too. But I just felt it was super lighthearted and more as a kids' film, and we just sort of felt like all those parents have to sit through a kids' film that the kids watch, because back in those days you had VHS and they got to watch it, again and again and again and again. But we felt that it could have been stronger. And then how to carefully approach it.
Okay, don't be careful. I'm not
going to get to the musical side of the.
I won't be as careful as you.
I love
Kevin.
the soundtrack.
Go ahead.
Well, I love the soundtrack to the first film a lot. The second film, I didn't care for it as much. In those days, in all respect to Rob and all the things that he's done in his lifetime, he was not a Vanilla Ice fan, and I felt that complicated the movie. It was a difficult sort of thing to manage, but that was a difficult thing. But I know you were on set.
Yes, I was.
So we were down a few times.
Yep, I might as well be not as kind as you
because some of yours.
Yeah, I really don't care, right? So I'm going to tell the truth about Vanilla Ice being on set. Vanilla Ice, I was down there the day that they shot the Go Ninja Go scene, and I'll tell you how it played out, right? Everyone was excited because celebrity was coming, and this guy and a lot of the younger women on the set were like, Vanilla Ice is coming. This is going to be cool. We're going to get a rock star down here. And he arrived, and he was one of the worst human beings that I'd ever met. He basically spent the entire day. I love what they did, but I thought it was a bad decision. And basically, he came on set and he sat on a golf cart all day, and he drove around a remote controlled car, and he had two bouncers sitting next to him, and all he did was just drive over people and get in the way. Well, that culminated in him driving into the Creature Workshop, and Brian Henson was they were so mad because this kid had driven into it. He alienated everybody. And then when he got on set and they started working, I remember the first AD, I remember this poor guy, and he was trying to get people, he's like partly working with the choreographer, and he was trying to get people to just do what they needed to do, Kevin. And Vanilla Ice was the one person that wouldn't do what he was being asked to do, partly because he was so stoned that he couldn't remember his own lines. He didn't know the words to his own song.
Oh, goodness. Oh.
And so it was a rough day, man. It was a rough time. Now, from that, and you are being very kind about the decision that they made, that evening after Vanilla Ice was on set, by the end of the day, everybody just couldn't handle it, right? Nobody wanted to be around this guy. So every young woman who had said, I can't wait for him to be there, was now like, get this jackass off our set, right? And so we all go out to dinner, and that was one of my least favorite things. I didn't enjoy the dinners because they would throw down $1,000 bottles of wine and stuff, and I just thought it was very excessive, and I wasn't a big fan of it. And I remember sitting with Tom Gray, and there was a table full of people, and I was sitting right near him, and Tom Gray looked at everybody and he said, so what do you think about Vanilla Ice? And the table froze because everybody wanted to say, wow, he's the worst person I've ever met, but they didn't know if Tom liked him. So there was a frozen moment where everybody was just terrified, and they were like, what do I say? And Tom kind of sat back and waited, and he had the whole power over the table. And then he said, I think he's really got something. And everybody at the table went, yeah, Tom, you're absolutely right. He's the best thing ever. And they started talking about making a movie around Vanilla Ice, and everybody was really enthusiastic because he's going to be a superstar. I remember getting home that night and going like, shoot me now, Kevin. It was like the worst. It was just a day on set, and you were like, all of these really hardworking people, and they're trying to make a movie, and they've got this guy Vanilla Ice in there, and he and the funniest part about it is, my understanding is that even to this day he profits off the Go Ninja stuff and Ninja Turtles and all that, and it's like, dude, you were killing us the day that you were on set, and yet you're still making a mo about it. So you're super kind, you're very nice about it. I didn't really have to be that kind because I was nobody.
Well, I'd say, I've never met him at any time then or since then. I did love his macaroni and cheese commercial, which I thought was really funny. Did you ever see that?
Yeah.
You saw the Kraft macaroni and cheese?
No.
Go Ninja goes. Anyway. No, but it was one of those things that Peter and I, as with what happened on the second movie, we just felt like, again, I don't want to take away anything that the fans loved about that movie, whether it be the Super Shredder stuff with Kevin Nash to those kind of things. But Pete and I just looked at it because, our heart and our soul, as far as storytellers, is making stories that make sense and things that work, and just silly things that one of the turtles turning up the amp to 11 and then pressing two keys on a keyboard blasts the Shredder character, and it was those kind of things that Pete and I just were like, you guys don't get it, again, though, there was moments in it that were great, but there was things that we were crushed over, and there really was a lot of discussion after the second movie came out and didn't perform as well as the first movie, and then Pete and I were not happy. We just felt that you guys missed the point, and that was sort of where the separation of what Hollywood's vision of the movie would be and what we wanted the movies to be and how we wanted them to work and make sense. So there was a long time between movie 2 and movie 3, and even movie 3, which I thought was overall a much stronger movie than movie 2. Unfortunately, is one of those things that I think that a lot of fans preferred movie 2 better. So that was sort of when that was the final of those movies until we developed the fourth movie with New Line Cinema.
Yeah. If you remember, actually, you and I saw the third movie together. I don't know where. I think we were in LA, but we went to go see it together, or we were brought to it together, or something. And I remember walking out with you and looking at you like, okay, and you were like, yeah, not bad. At least it wasn't the second one.
Yeah.
The second one was a real problem, and I agree with you. I thought the second one was just, the second one was hideous, man, and the experience was hideous.
Yeah, because it is, because I can't imagine it's like I don't mean this to be a digression or something. I wish Jack Kirby had been alive to see Captain America: The First Avenger.
Yeah,
because Captain America was one of those. I was a Daredevil fan. I was Batman. I was Captain America. It was all the superheroes that were a bit more grounded. But you mentioned Marvel's cinematic universe and what they built and what they were doing and what they did with that movie, The First Avenger, was the perfect movie for a true Captain America fan. They did nothing wrong, in my opinion, of that movie. And I think Marvel Cinematic Universe has done so many things right, but that was one of those things that because there were terrible Captain America films done before. I mean, even actually, there's a funny anecdote, and to this day I still need to find the original proposal, but pre Golden Harvest and what became the first movie, we actually got a proposal from Roger Corman's New World Cinema, and the concept was Billy Crystal, Gallagher, Sam Kinison, and Bobcat Goldthwait were going to be the Turtles.
Wow.
They were going to paint their faces green with a mask on, and they were going to wear these shells. And it was this very low budget version where the antagonist was a version of the Shredder, but he had these ninja nuns on roller skates, and there was a bunch of other really B-movie kind of stuff that they proposed. And I remember Pete and I reading this together back in Main Street, above where you were working at the time, and just looking at it going, and just went like, what? But I think I know I have that proposal somewhere, but that was the luxury of being in control of your characters and your creations, is you can say no to those things that didn't work, because we said yes to some things that we knew better.
Yeah. Well, would you say that perhaps that was one of the hardest situations? Because I remember in the offices, obviously back at Mirage, and I was a bit more dealing with it at that point. I was actually more on the set and actually being involved in the licensing side of it, right? Inadvertently, by mistake. I was just really young, and there was no one else to do it. And I remember that you guys kind of kept saying, we don't like this and we don't approve this. And it still ended up in the movie, like it wasn't a positive situation. Would you say that was one of the hardest parts of this thing, was just trying to deal with Hollywood and realizing how hard it is to do it?
Well, it was in so many ways, because we had some pretty strict and some very stringent sort of approval things, but they still had loopholes in that we had full approval of the likeness and the use of the characters, what the characters look like. We had approval of the treatment, the final treatment. But we, for example, had 85. The final screenplay. The movie had to conform to at least 80 to 85%. I'm not sure exactly. It was at that level that the final movie had to conform to that percentage of the final screenplay, which gives them room for editing or adjustments and those kinds of things. And so that was sort of like the first thing where, again, a couple guys going in pretty naive, and that we just assumed everybody was honest and everybody just wanted the same thing we wanted, because our experience with Steve Barron and Todd Langdon and just the Creature Shop, that everybody was on the same page, and that page was to make the best movie possible. And the fact that sort of there were people that was sort of like, well, that's what you think, but we're really in control because we're the guys that now have a very successful franchise and we're making a lot of money. We're doing this stuff, so we're going to choreograph to what we in Hollywood think is a better version of the Turtles than what you guys think is a better version of the Turtles. So that was where the movie kind of came out. That was a slap in the face where we go, oh, I get it. Everybody lies and everybody has a different kind of agenda than we are. It's like the chance of winning the lottery to ending up on a film or project that is such a perfect storm, the way the first movie was, is a rarity and an oddity in Hollywood. So that was sort of our first wake up call. And that was, and then as that was something as we continued on with different entertainment opportunities and things that we were involved in with the Turtles, that we still exerted a certain amount of control. And sometimes I think we probably went a little over the top because we were really taken aback by what happened with movie 2. That it was challenging.
Yeah.
So we had control, but we didn't have the control.
By the way, I should point out as we continue to the next little bit that my nephew Charlie is you can see him on screen right there, who asks what's our favorite Ninja Turtle. That's Richard's kid, so that's my brother's son, Charlie. So Kevin, I think you can answer this really quickly. Who's your favorite Ninja Turtle? Did you ever have a favorite?
Well, to me it was tough because the way that the Turtles evolved, where this is the first turtle that was drawn as the joke that I put on Peter's desk, and I said,
yeah,
this is going to be the next big thing, ha ha ha. And that evolved into that drawing that had all 4 of them with the full title. I called it a Ninja Turtle. It was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. So I feel like this was Michelangelo before Michelangelo became Michelangelo. Although both Peter and I certainly love them, like my children. And so it's hard to pick a favorite. But if people say, well, if you had to pick, I'll usually joke with them. I go like, well, I choose Donato or Raffacello. But then I'll go, it's like, if I have to choose one, I just choose Mikey, only because he was firstborn. But I just love them, all. And then oftentimes when if I'm exploring an idea, especially my sensibilities usually gravitated towards Raphael, and that he was the most unpredictable of the Turtles. So I felt that you could do things with him as a character that you couldn't do with the others, and you could push him farther and deeper and do some unexpected things, especially when you teamed him with Casey Jones. But
Mine was Donatello, man. I really loved Donatello because he was the underdog. Not many kids liked him as much. He was the least popular turtle, and he was a total nerd, right? And this is just back then. I mean, just in the terms of toy sales and merchandising and stuff, you could kind of categorize. You could see what the data was, and Raphael was by far the one that sold the most stuff. If it had Raphael on it, it would be really popular. Mikey was really popular. Leo was the leader, but Donatello was kind of like the goofus, and I like the doofus. I really like Donnie. So that's sort of like an aside. So I'll tell you quickly, like what my lowest point was. There was a very strange situation for me when we were on set, and it wasn't actually almost tied into the Ninja Turtles, but it was actually a different thing. I was at Carol Co. the day that Brandon Lee died. He was on the Crow. And, we as you and I through Tundra and other relationships were nominally tied into that film. And so I remember being on set and we were watching dailies one night and they walked in and we'd already been through the shock of Jim Henson on the first film, which was crazy. And they suddenly told us that Brandon Lee had been killed on the set. And even now I'm saying it like out loud, and the hairs are going up on my eyes. I remember everybody sat there for a moment, and there was this kind of quiet in the room because people sort of thought, is that real? And you've got to be kidding me. And that's right here. And I knew we were tied to it. I remember thinking, I mean, it was just difficult, right? It was just an awful moment. I know it wasn't Ninja Turtles, but we were right there, and we were tied to it. And being on set when Brandon was killed was awful, man. That was that moment where you thought, like, whew, you know.
Well, you know, just to you know to you know I don't want to say this. It's still going to be too weird, but the worst and the creepiest part is that you were on set that they filmed in a disheartening part of many years later, because the set in Wilmington, North Carolina, which we were on, which they shot The Crow on,
Yeah.
originally built for a movie called Dino De Laurentiis did a movie called Year of the Dragon with Mickey Rourke. A lot of it got blown down in a hurricane, but they rebuilt it just for the turtle film. And so there's a scene, and actually it's one of James O'Barr's cameos. There's a scene where he's one of the thieves in the Crow movie, where he's stealing a TV from set. That's the second time around story. That's the second time around shot. So you were back down on a set that you'd already been to.
Yeah.
They're filming the turtle movies, and that's what they're filming the Crow. And what's even crazier, and how this ties in, because it was so devastating and heartbreaking, in that when at Tundra, when I brought you over to run so many important parts of Tundra, one of the properties that we retained was the Crow, and then at that time we had rights to movies and all the entertainment stuff and all that kind of stuff, and we actually through Limelight, Steve Bear's company, again the director of the first Turtle movie, he had a company called Limelight, and so I had invested in that company, and part of Limelight, that's part of our many trips to LA, was sort of trying to marry the creativity of what we were doing with Tundra's projects with LA, and our was Limelight. Alex Proyas was one of the #1 directors of commercials and videos for Limelight. And Steve was desperately trying to find him. We were all trying to desperately find him a movie project, which then ended up, he was sort of stolen away by Ed Pressman, who ultimately came down to, even though we had this all rights deal with James O'Barr, he forgot that he signed a deal with Ed Pressman for the movie rights. And so when Ed Pressman started developing in the movie, we had a discussion where we had a very polite discussion, which allowed us to then manage and control all of the licensing rights to the Crow, in lieu of being a partner with them as the Crow movie moved forward. So, so they stole Alex Proyas, they stole this thing, and so they were shooting down on this turtle set. And I remember, like, actually before even Brandon was cast, Brandon Lee, the amazing Brandon Lee, the first Crow actor that was attached to the thing was attached to the project was a singer from Texas called Brandon Sexton III, who had a one-hit wonder and actually had that goth kind of look. That was then sort of disbanded when a very young Christian Slater was attached to it temporarily as the Crow. And then through a partnership that based in Hong Kong, that were funding a lot of Brandon Lee's early movies, like Rapid Fire, which was an amazing movie, and unfortunately a terrible movie that came out in the States called Showdown in Little Tokyo, which was Brandon Lee and Dolph Lundgren. But it was one of those things that when Brandon was cast, I was concerned because I had only seen Showdown in Little Tokyo, but they were funding a lot of the movie. But then we started having dailies come in, as you said. He was just perfect and just brilliant, and just so many things with Alex Proyas' vision on those sets. I never went down to set when they were filming. You did a number of times, but it was just and there was this weird thing that not long before Brandon passed away through a mishap, a very unfortunate and stupid technical mishap on set. That they had sort of dubbed bad luck. There was a lot of bad luck, a lot of things that had happened on the set.
Well, it was bad luck and a little bit of stupidity by pointing a full load at someone's chest and pulling the trigger. You know, not a good idea. So it's
so
very
it
sad.
was very, very sad. Very hard.
Now, on a light note, there were some amazing moments, and I know that I want to tell one anecdote of us going over to the premiere about the Star of India restaurants. I'm going to tell that. So think for a second, right? If you can think of like one of the funnier moments of this thing, because there was plenty of stuff going on. I'm going to tell everybody a little bit about this crazy thing that we did. So we go over to the premiere. And we get together with Steve Barron, the director, and he's a really straightforward guy. He was a really nice guy, wasn't he? And he said, hey, let's all go to the Star of India. So now I knew where the Star of India was, and and I'm like the resident Brit with the Americans, and so we all go off to the Star of India with the director of the Ninja Turtle movie. And it was a particularly interesting place because the guy who ran it was a lovely guy. He was a lovely gay gentleman, but he was Indian, and his family were very unhappy about him being gay, and so they sort of disowned him. But he was super flamboyant guy, right? Remember, he was really friendly, and you'd walk in, he'd go, "Hey, everybody," and he was, and so he, we're sitting there, and we got like leather jackets on, and we're eating this food. And what we didn't know was that guy would play show tunes, remember? And so we're sitting in the middle of, we're just about to take a bite of food, and all of a sudden, bam, Oklahoma weather.
That was like, it's like, there was an Indian restaurant in Northampton, Massachusetts, which, to set the stage, was, the best Indian food we'd ever had.
Right, right. Yeah.
And then you go to London, and Steve Barron said, one of his favorite food is Indian food, and we said we love it, but this food at this restaurant was the real deal. It was the best Indian. I still remember to this day, like everything was like the best food we'd ever eaten, especially Indian food, and it was fantastic. But I do remember those moments where it was, like you said, it's like we had taken up a big part of the upstairs. I was up on the second level, and then it would be like we're about to take a bite, and it'd be like, "What?" He'd break through
He didn't give us any warning. He just started playing, and so now he's right next to. I mean, he literally was this close to me. And so there was one other funny thing about it, which I thought was brilliant, which was we had a friend who was one of the Ninja Turtle artists that was with us. And he, to be fair, he was a little worried. He was a little homophobic. He was a bit worried about it, or he wasn't sure how to deal with it. And he found out that this guy who owned the restaurant would always give everybody a kiss on the way out. We're like, great, give us a kiss on the way out, give us on the cheek, and we're good. And he spent the next hour trying to work out, how can I escape and get out before the guy tries to kiss me on the cheek. And it was great. It was excruciating to watch. But I'll never forget sitting in there and having the guy singing Oklahoma. And I was sort of like, yeah, the movie business. That was my most surreal moment, but I think it was also almost one of the funniest moments as well. But I'm sure you've had like millions of surreal moments with those movies. Probably,
Yeah, but it is treasures like that. It is like, it's can be like, there's a lot, and it's sort of trying to figure out, like, you remember certain highlights, and then that's what I always would laugh about, like, when we get in these quick catch-up calls, and suddenly it's 2 hours later, and both our wives are going like,
yeah,
are you still talking to Paul? But it was those moments that sort of made everything would ground it a bit, because there was sort of a fantastic level of, because a lot of people, again, throughout so many of these adventures, especially in the early days, when people would just say, it's amazing and what you went through and all these things, and it's different when you're in the middle of it, and because you're not really navigating as best you can. It's like going down a level 5 rapids, and an analogy of some point where you're navigating it as best you can, but you're moving very fast, and there's a lot going on, and you're just hoping for the best, and you do sort of try to keep your wits about you, and make the best choices you can. But there's so many moments, and it's the weird stuff. It is like, meeting Casey Elias Koteas for the first time. But I remember, even like meeting Casey for the first time. But then when I spent so much time in LA, I started working out at this gym, and I remember going to this gym one day, and there's Elias Koteas on the treadmill, and I hadn't seen him in years, and I went like, holy smokes, there's Casey Jones on the treadmill. What? And it's just, so you remember different things. It's more like I said, with this, there's a lot of happy memories. There were challenges. There were difficult memories because, at some point where the company had grown and blossomed and become this thing, like you mentioned earlier about the control over the look of, say, licensing guy. You were doing a lot of work in the licensing area, and we'd have like, say if we were licensing a coloring book or something, they would have these artists that they would hire, and they'd turn in this work, and Pete and I would be, through you and Prindle and whatnot, would be sort of, no, this isn't work. And then it sort of evolved where, like, you've got, Jim Lawson and Mike Dooney and Steve Levine and these amazing artists that are doing stuff in-house. So I said, let's create this sort of side business for the preservation of what we wanted the characters to look like and be out there. So a lot of times, all that video game art, toy designs, the Archie comics were produced in-house. I mean, all that stuff that we were producing was with Mirage artists, so it came as sort of pre-approved and
Yep. Yeah, I mean, it was a really good little operation if you think about it, because a lot of times stuff will get turned around really quickly. We would make sure that licensees weren't waiting forever; they got it turned around pretty quickly. We were really consistent. Anyone that lied and cheated and tried to do substandard product, we would step on them and say that's not fair to us, and we would make sure that they didn't. I remember that very clearly. So, it was a good little operation, but it was really confusing time, man, because when you're involved with all this crazy stuff happening around you, you never know what's going to be next, right? And
I was just wondering, do you have a favorite Weird Turtle licensing item that came across?
I do. Okay, so first of all, when the electronic talking toothbrush, I'm like, that was amazing. But my favorite thing, this is a true story. Obviously, we'll get into licensing next time we talk, but this is a true story, right? So you remember the pinball machine, the Ninja Turtle pinball machine? It was great. It was a really fun game. But do you remember that the April in the Ninja Turtle pinball machine was very, very chesty? She was super top heavy. That was my fault.
That was your fault.
Yes, it was. It was an accident. We got the artwork in, and I think you or Prindle, the guy who's the licensing guy, or Pete had said, she doesn't quite look right. She's super flat chested, in the way that she just didn't look like the cartoon. Yeah. And said, we need to, I don't know if it was you or Prindle or whatever, but we need to change it. And so I drew a big W on her chest as an indicator to say, hey, just as a reminder, we need to make sure that she actually conforms to the way the other April looked. And they drew it as big as the W that I drew. So all of a sudden,
oh my God, that's funny.
We got the artwork back, and it was the boobs were huge. And I looked around like, oh no, I didn't mean, but they had already done it and they put it into production. That's my favorite licensing story.
I like, it's funny because it's like, and actually you touched on it earlier, talking about some of the early animated episodes, and we'll talk about it the next time, of course, because we're going to put out stuff online. But one of the things I found with the early animated episodes were these early development pictures of April as the animated character, which evolved into the character she became. So I love this idea of like what Peter and I did with April initially in issue 2 is she had a jumpsuit on. And so that evolved to the jumpsuit as a scientist to become the jumpsuit as her thing. But I kept jokingly, because it was just, we were sitting around with a bunch of the toy designers, because Pete and I would go up to LA often or do stuff. So I would just always make April's boobs bigger just to make everybody laugh. So I'd be like, oh, she'd be like this. We should have large boobs. They go, stop doing this.
Is that right?
And have the camera and all this stuff. So you'll see some of these early drawings of April.
Well, there you go. I guess everybody was drawing on April's boobs. I had no idea. I didn't really mean to do anything. I was just kind of saying, hey, as a reminder, someone had told me hey, her boobs aren't big enough. They don't look like the normal character. So I remember drawing on this thing and saying, hey, reminder, what I drew these big boobs to play, and they drew it on the stuff.
No, I think when it finally came in, it was just because it's sort of like the foot or the shredder is kind of holding her with her hands behind her back, and she's got this
Yeah.
whole cleavage. But I think
yeah, she got some big cleavage. So that was pretty funny. Let me ask you this. As we go on, like this is a legacy for you, right? Like obviously with Ninja Turtles, it's a thing that you created. It has some elements of a life of its own, and there's a bunch of stuff that I know because I was there that you and Pete made sure happened, right? And we did as a group. Like we made sure that stuff happened properly, but it was really driven by what you guys did. And I've created characters with Marvel and other that have lived on, like the Sentry and other characters like that. But here's your characters, and obviously at a certain point, they go into other movies, right? And at this point, you're distanced from it to some extent because it's been a while and other people are taking them. So you got the 2007 one. I think it was 2007, right? I got a picture of it up here somewhere. It's the I'll do this sort of share screen so people can see it. It's 2007 movie. It says on this. It's this one, right? That was Kevin Monroe, right?
Fantastic. It's sort of like. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I guess my question is, what do you make of that? Like what this was another movie, and I know that I think you were a bit higher on that. I seem to remember you telling me at a certain point you were enjoying that process, I think, but I can't quite remember. What was that all about?
Well, it was an interesting time in the evolution of the Turtles and my relationship with the Turtles as a property. In that, I sold creative control to Pete, and Pete did the wonderfully excellent Fox Kids. We call it the 2000 series. So that ran for a bunch of years, and I think it started around 2002, 2003, and it ran for a number of seasons. And as that sort of started to trail off, there had actually been a number of Turtle movies in development, including one that involved Steve Barron being developed. He was part of the development process with Hallmark to do it as a mini series, which then, after a couple of years of development, sort of fell off, and there was not a lot going on with the Turtles on the larger scale, say the movie side of things. So Tom Gray came back into the picture with a company called Imagi, and Imagi was a company that was founded by this guy that his dad's company made a couple $1 billion selling artificial Christmas trees through Walmart. So he formed an animation company, which became Imagi. And so he first produced a series of 6 episodes of a Siegfried and Roy animated series. That I think only 2 made it to air. It was full CG. It was very early days. We're talking again 2006 maybe, and that maybe 2005, and then that bombed. But he had the money and he was building the studio, so he came in and was willing to fund a big chunk of a movie like this, a full animated Turtle movie. So around that time, I was working with Tom Gray and another guy named Joe Pearson, and we were developing a Crow animated movie, again, low budget, talking $5 million, Highlander animated movie, direct to DVD, those kind of things. So we were developing that. And Tom came to me and said, hey, Francis really wants to do a Turtle movie. Do you think this is something that could happen? And I said, well, let me run it by Mirage and see if they have any thoughts, if it's something they'd like to do. And there was a bunch of discussion there, and basically it was better for me to sort of step back from it and let that discussion happen between these parties and see if it could move forward, which it did. And so it was produced within the same facility, and that's the first time I met Kevin Monroe. And what I loved about what Kevin's vision was with the Turtles and what he wanted to do with this movie is he also worked very closely with Peter on it, was that it'd be a version of the Turtles that was sort of updated from maybe where they left off in the first 3 live action Turtle movies, where they still had the the relationships and the difficult relationships and the different things and how turtles made money and how they survived, what their place in space in this world was. And so it was very clever. And I love that the first 18 months of this movie were done under Kevin's direction without any input from anybody because Weinstein Company, which was part of Warner Brothers, who was distributing it, well, really sort of, to them, it was kind of a throwaway picture. Like, hey, this other company in China is paying for most of it. They're doing all the work, and there's this relatively unknown director doing it. And so the best part of that movie was that Kevin had complete autonomy to do such an amazing movie like the Fight in the Rain with Raphael and cast guys like, it was Chris Evans' first, superhero movie, if you will. He was the voice of Casey Jones. Sarah Michelle Gellar was April and all that stuff. And so by the time that, Warner Brothers figured out that, hey, this movie's really, really good, then they came in and messed up a bunch of stuff at the end. But ultimately, I thought it was a great picture. It was one of my favorite of the turtle pictures outside of since the first movie. So it was
amazing. So I was going to say, it's amazing how these things can get messed up, Kev. I was involved sort of nominally, well, I've relatively close involvement with Wolverine because I wrote the origin of Wolverine for Marvel, right?
That's
and
right.
a mate of mine who was on that film, and he told me he came in to help fix that film because the first film was an absolute mess. And what he told me was that once they realized that this was going to be quite big, they said there was another movie that had come out. Let's say, for the sake of argument, it was the first Nolan Batman movie or something. And they saw that it was really popular, and they said, "Oh, we need to be more like that movie." So they changed it and made it darker. And then the first Iron Man movie came out, and they said, "Well, actually, you know what? We need more tech in this." So then they told the filmmakers, "Well, we need more tech." And these are all the executives from Fox. And then by the time that they finished that, they got a mess on their hands. So they said, well, why don't we just try to fix it and bring it back to what it was intended to be? Only Hollywood can mess up stuff that badly sometimes. You had the origin of Wolverine. You could have done anything with it. And the fact is, even though it was really quite a poor movie, it still made money. And so they were all really happy with themselves and patting themselves on the back and saying, look what we did. But you and I both know you could have done an awful lot better if you had never done that. You should have just let the creators create. Is something that I know that's where you came from when I first met you. That's what Tundra was all about. And so, not trying to do homogenized forms of entertainment, but be really true to the stuff is really important, right? Now, speaking of which, and I guess I'm going to get your reaction because I'm about to find out, right? So you tell me. You got some other stuff here. so what do you make of this was cool, right? And then you got this.
What was the other slide? No, that's it. What's interesting in what you said before resonates on so many levels is that now it goes back to literally if you touch on the concerns that Peter and I had on the first movie is that we've seen so many really bad adaptations of characters that were beloved to us, certainly as fans and things like that were then butchered by Hollywood because it was still and I guess I look at one of the reasons I founded stop showing those. No, I'm kidding.
Sorry, man. I'm just messing with you.
You should show that there was a great shot when they first showed the picture of Turtle with the nose that some fan artist online replaced it with Shrek and then put Donkey behind him.
That's funny. That's funny.
But no, there was a deep concern of comics versus even cartoons of integrity. I remember guys that did newspaper cartoons used to look down on comic book artists because, well, we're in the newspaper, you just do comic books, and you go well, we're kind of the same. But they go well, it's this frowned upon system, much like you wrote a book that's very popular. We're going to adapt it in Hollywood, but you know how to write a book, but we know how to make a movie, and they would sort of dismiss that because we know better. Same with so many comic books, especially in the early days that became movies that were terrible versus when you had things like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, when you had Captain America: The First Avenger done, somebody finally got it, and it was probably a guy like Kevin Feige that grew up reading Captain America and said, "Why the hell are we just making it like this comic book, which I loved as a kid? This is what was awesome. Let's adapt this to the screen." The same with Iron Man. The same with Thor. This works, and that's why those movies work. Because suddenly you go like, I remember the first time watching, Josh Whedon's Avengers. It was you practically wept because it was like something you read as a kid in the early '70s brought to life in a way that you could have never imagined as a live action.
And he had written the comics, right? I was actually working up at Marvel when Joss was in there at one point, and he was writing one of the comics, so he understood what comics could do, and then he translated that into film. That's great to see that, right? Kevin Feige told me one time that The Sentry was their best movie. They actually care about he knows the content. The point would be it would be their best movie. They're never going to make it because they can't, but. The idea is that the people that care about it and the creators that love it, if they're allowed to actually create and make stuff, guess what happens? Great stuff happens. And when the creators are not allowed to make it and it becomes Hollywood by committee or creation by committee, look what ends up happening. And it's very frustrating to watch because you kind of can predict it. It's going to be a mess. It's going to fall apart. They do it anyway, just like I felt the second movie was a bit like that. It was very difficult to watch the process because it really was good for the kids a little bit, but it wasn't good for the franchise. And you guys knew better. And as the creators, you always knew better. So
no, even you showed like the thing is like when we started development when development started on the 2014 Turtle movie. I worked with Scott Mendick and Galen Walker, and we developed a movie. Actually, the first script was written by a guy named John Fusco, who wrote Young Guns and a few other things. I still have the original copy of the script. It was much like J.J. Abrams' approach to Force Awakens, in that he threw the tricks.
All right, we got a little sound that's going bad. Hold on a second, Kevin. I think your sound went really bad in the middle of it. We're going to try that one again and see. Give it another try. No, we lost him mid anecdote. In the stream, in the comments, can anybody tell me if Kevin's mic is going funny? Because it sounded a little bit funky right there. It went all kinds of funky. If you're in the stream, can you just type in and tell me if you're hearing this properly? Because it's getting funky. Yeah, audio warbles. Okay, so we've got audio issues, Kev. I would say I'll entertain the troops for 1 second while you maybe reboot your mic or come on out and come back in again. Yeah. We got all kinds of audio issues. Yeah, we got StreamYard issues, unfortunately.
I'm so sorry. I didn't touch you.
All right. Well, I think everybody can hear me just fine, but I think Kevin's gone funky. So I put you on mute for a second, Kevin. Why don't you unplug for 1 second and come right back in, and then we'll wrap up our session anyway, okay? Try to go back out of the studio and back in again. Leave and come back. And then we'll try that. Sorry, everyone. A little bit of technical difficulties on Kevin's end, but not a problem. And my mic is okay, so that's good to hear. Yeah, the coronavirus is interfering with the stream. What I will say to everybody, if you're watching along, as Kevin kind of heads out and tries to come back in, if you have any questions, please write them in right now, and we'll try to answer a couple of questions for you. So, Kevin, if you can exit StreamYard for a second and come back in, it will work, okay? So just exit out and then come back in. And then, so if you guys have any questions, then please go ahead and ask us questions. If you have any comments that you want to make, go ahead and make a couple of comments. I'm trying my best to keep this going while Kevin, the main attraction, is gone. But what we're going to do, if you guys are in here right now and you are willing, we would love it if you could like or mash on that like button, because that will bring more people in. We'd love it if you guys would be willing to subscribe to us, because if you subscribe, then we will get more people coming in future. Kevin's coming back, don't worry. So let me answer a couple of questions if I can, while Kevin's finding his way back. Paul, can I come on your show? Is that Dan? Because if you can, then definitely. Did we take anything from the set? If so, what? And how did you get it off the set? Well, I actually did take a few things, but I didn't steal them, just so that we're clear, because I really could care less about stealing anything. I make money the old-fashioned way. I earn it. But I did actually take a few things from the set, because I was given some things, which is really nice. So I've got a couple of really old things from the original movie. Jeff asks me, is it true that my real name is Theodore? Thanks a bunch, mate. I really appreciate that. Thanks for the great question. But no. All right, let's try Kevin again. Hey buddy. Try again. Hey, he's back.
Hear me?
Yes, we hear you just fine. Thanks, mate.
No, it was
I'm going to go on a limb and guess, thank you, Courtney, for being awesome.
as I keep hearing like this thing runs on steam or coal or something. No, thankfully it's like, I'm just a technophobe. It's like I always relate myself to Neil from the Young Ones. Oh, yeah. Techno fear.
Well, we got a couple of questions in here, Kev. I think we kind of lost a large part of the thing you were saying. So we'll answer a couple of questions and then we'll wrap it up. Okay. No, let's go to one from George over here. Will we ever see the brutal Mirage Turtles animation or comic, or would that likely never happen? That's an interesting question.
No, it's actually an incredible question on two fronts, because it's funny. We were doing some touring last year before we wrapped up, and people were asking, what's the next evolution of the Turtles? And I said, if you ask me, and what I would love to see, because so many of our fans are of the original generation, which are now, again, 30 or up, is I'd like to see a Daredevil style, Netflix Daredevil style version of the Turtles, because I think there is a huge audience for that material. It's not like, you want to see heads being lopped off and flying in all directions. You want something that's done realistically and the way it was intended, the way we did the original black and white issues, which, Charlie Cox, who was amazing for Daredevil, and what they did with that series was brought back the best moments of what Frank Miller did in that series. So I'd love to see that. And then for the comic book series, actually Tom Waltz, who just wrote 100 issues of the Turtles, by accident. But Tom Waltz wrote 100 issues of the Turtles from 2011 to last year, 2019. I was part of that series, and it was an amazing thing in every capacity. We are working on a story right now called The Last Ronin. The Last Ronin is based on an idea that Pete and I wrote in 1987. So Tom and I are adapting that, and it's going to be sort of our, to steal from Frank Miller again, it's going to be sort of our Dark Knight version of the Turtles. It's an older, set in the future. And it's
that's cool. So Anthony asks, was there ever any intention to add a fifth or sixth turtle, possibly female? That's a thorny subject.
Well, it is, because I know everybody loves and remembers Venus de Milo from the.
Yes, there was a fifth turtle. Her name was Venus de Milo.
Short history of that, just to elaborate, was when we were developing. After the third Turtle movie came out with New Line Cinema, Mike DeLuca was in charge, and we were developing a fourth Turtle movie. And the fourth Turtle movie had a fifth turtle, which is going to be added to the series, and he was named Kirby. He was a male turtle, floated further downstream. That was sort of the impetus of the story.
Yeah.
That movie never went any further. When Margaret Loesch and Chaim Saban came in wanted to do a live action series, we brought that concept of the movie and adding a fifth turtle to this new series. In the 11th hour, it was changed to a female turtle, which then Pete hated. I felt we could do something with it. I love strong female characters. The series wasn't as successful. It was successful in ratings, But the difficulty of working with Saban was what ended up ultimately killing the series. And so when Tom and I started working on the IDW comic series, one of the things, by the time we got to issue 50, one of the things that he wanted to add, and we both agreed we'd love to add a female turtle to the mix, but there was no way at that time we could figure out how to do it that made sense. But through the creation of a character called Jenica that was introduced to the turtle family over a number of issues, became really popular, and through the sort of She-Hulk blood transfusion becoming the Hulk thing, we added a fifth turtle called Jenica, based on as part of an existing turtle character in issue 95, and so far she's been super popular. So we have a fifth turtle, it's a female turtle. She's named Jenica, and you can find some of the latest issues of the turtles.
That's pretty cool, man. Actually, I'm glad that is that's come to fruition, because Venus was really not seen as being much fun. I don't think the fans really, they didn't want to. It felt shoehorned in a little bit, but now there's a female character that fits.
You're right. It was completely shoehorned in. It was sort of presented in a way, and even though as that version of the Turtles, the live action version, was dumbed down a little bit for a younger audience, and I think it was just a series of unhappy accidents that.
Yeah. So we're asked what our favorite pizza toppings. I'm about to go on old school on you. So Northampton, right in the center of Northampton, there was a pizza place, right? And it was across the street from Main Street. So whatever that place was called. And I used to go in there and get chicken, spinach, and blue cheese pizza like twice a week, because that is the greatest set of pizza toppings. And however it was that those guys made it was unbelievable. I used to eat spinach. I put on about 30 pounds because I couldn't get away from their pizza.
What was that thing? Yeah, it was right next to Michelson's, and around where the that was like.
Yeah.
It was no. So it was I can remember. It was like it just had a big sign that said pizza.
Basically, it was a pizza place. God knows what it's called. Northampton Pizza, probably. But they made spinach, chicken, and blue cheese pizza, and that was unbelievable. That pizza. So we got.
It was fantastic. It was great crust. It was great, and it had a wide variety of vegan and all that stuff. But our family favorite pizza is based on Courtney's dad, who loves Hawaiian style pizza with ham and pineapple, but he adds jalapenos to it. Man, it's just the most perfect pizza. I like heavy cheese and white pizza, and
so it's Hawaiian.
I like a lot of different kinds of pizza.
Sorry, Hawaiian pizza with jalapenos, yeah.
Yep, Hawaiian pizza. You have to dice up the jalapenos and sort of spread them around. So it's Hawaiian pizza with jalapenos.
I like it. Well, we'll try to get to people's questions quickly, and then we'll kind of wind ourselves up. Who would you want to see the Ninja Turtles team up with? What about you, mate? Who would you want to see them team up with?
Personally, Deadpool would be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Turtles Deadpool crossover. Daredevil, of course, would be fantastic. One of my actually involved into. I pitched. That's great. Oh, like, you kidding me? That would be fantastic. Especially if the Tom Holland Spider-Man would be fantastic.
Yeah.
I pitched Dan Didio at DC. My dream team up for the Turtles would be a Turtles Commandy crossover. So I pitched them a Turtles Commandy crossover, and he's like, nobody knows who Commandy is anymore. Why don't you do a Turtles Batman crossover? And I was like, didn't realize that was on the table. And so, fortunately, DC and IDW moved forward, and they hired the most amazing writer, James Tinian, who worked with Freddie Williams, who's incredible and one of my best friends. And we've done 3 series on that. So Turtles Batman was probably one of those childhood dream come trues, because Batman was one of my faves. I mentioned him earlier. I like Daredevil, Batman. I like the more grounded superheroes, but Spider-Man would be awesome. How about you? What would you? Spider-Man, Turtles?
I kind of got it. I wrote Spider-Man for Marvel for 6 years, and I love Spider-Man. He was always a character that I felt was easiest to write, and it was mostly like me. I felt like I was this guy, and I was just writing stories about me. I'm not a hero. I'm just saying I like this character, and I just write me in it. And for Mary Jane, I would just write my wife Melinda, and I would just write stories about the two of us. So I think New York and Ninja Turtles being with Spider-Man, they're all misunderstood. They all kind of live in the shadows. I think that would be a perfect crossover, frankly. That would be incredible. By the way, the answer, Miss Sai, the answer to the question why Kirby is almost always Jack Kirby. So Kevin and I, especially, but I got my reverence for Jack Kirby from Kevin. But Jack Kirby really is the guy that created basically everything at Marvel. I mean, Jack is the guy that made it, and it's very sad. I got some Kirby stories that we'll tell a little bit later in some of their other streams, but Jack Kirby was a genius, and he made the most incredible stuff. You heard Kevin say Commandy, the last boy on Earth, would be his. Why? Because Kevin's a big nerd and he likes Jack Kirby. So anything that has Jack Kirby on, Kevin would say yes to. Question: when you made the first issue, the reason it wasn't colored, was that just because the black and white boom was helpful, or because you couldn't afford the color?
Pretty much, we couldn't afford the color. It was.
Yeah. I knew the answer to that.
Yeah. When we went to the, because it was a very small printer in, it's called the Lakeville Journal, and they printed the local TV facts or sort of leave behind advertisements that were left around supermarkets or convenience stores, so it was black and white. So it was like they were cheap, and that's how we sort of set our prices. Like, how much could we get for 500? How much for 1,000? How much for 3,000? So we ended up asking my Uncle Quentin for $1,200 because it was enough to print 3,000 copies in black and white with a 2-color cover, and put one ad in the Comics Buyer's Guide to try to sell these mail order.
Yeah. And stories about your Uncle Quentin and the money he lent you and all of that stuff, those are coming, because there's some stories in there. I'll address this really quickly because I think this is probably one for Courtney and or you. Jasneet asks, can they get commissions from you? Now, I think that's usually a business thing, not necessarily for our stream, but I will say that the way to do that would probably be through your studio, Kevin, or something like that.
If anything you want to ask, inquire, or follow up, whether it be we just have tons of free content or original content or commissions, things, just go to KevinEastmanStudios.com, and that's where you can be in touch with Fiona and Kevin Russell, who run the website. They're basically, Fiona's our COO, Kevin Russell's our creative director of everything. And so what I love about studio, Kevin Eastman Studios, is this is like Courtney and I, husband, it's husband and wife with Kevin and Fiona, husband and wife, and that's it. We have 3 wiener dogs and 2 cats. Otherwise, we run the whole business. But we are doing commissions, but we're sort of just being careful. I've always had a problem with I would hate anybody to ask for commission and have them wait for a long period of time. And I've unfortunately made that mistake where people would sign up and ask for a commission, but then suddenly it's 3 years later and I still haven't finished it. But that's only because I'm working on a comic or series or writing stuff. It's not.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do more.
So here's a question. I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Would you rather another Michael Bay Ninja Turtle movie? We probably should have you mention the nostril thing, because that's actually kind of funny. But they put nostrils in. Here's the skinny is they put nostrils on them when Kevin said don't put nostrils on them, and that's pretty much the way that they tended to approach that film, right, Kev?
Yeah, well, it's funny because they one of the development artists discovered those. Remember that Michael Zulli series we did at Mirage years ago? And it was sort of one of those. The
one with the animals with Stephen Murphy, the one with the animals. Yeah. I can't remember what it's called now, but I'll remember it in a bit. Yeah,
but it was called. It was kind of like a what if kind of story. Yeah. Because the turtles were larger in size, and they had, Michael had this wonderful. He was a naturalist. He was a artist that did a lot of wildlife drawings and illustrations, including the Puma Blue series that they originally did.
Puma Blue.
Puma Blues, but yeah, they did. So it was a more realistic take on the look of the turtles, and I just said when they did this. Some of the early conceptual designs, and that I think was the philosophy of the 2014 movie, where the first time I sat with Jonathan Liebsman, who was actually the director of the movie, and said, I've never seen a turtle comic book. I've never seen a turtle cartoon. I've never seen any movies. I want to make the greatest turtle movie ever. Fill me in.
Great.
And that's where our relationship started.
Yeah.
So pretty much then it seemed to be the thing that like anything that I was bringing to the table that I thought was important to the structure, the heart and soul of the Turtles, making them smaller, making them underdogs. Think Sarah Connor, think Lieutenant Ripley, think of any Spider-Man. You think of any underdog story that takes on this menace from across the universe that's going to destroy Earth, and it's fought in this small neighborhood in Queens. And it's like you want the underdog to win. I said that's what makes a great story, like with the Turtles. And so they go, okay, never mind. And so whatever I said, it seemed to be the MO for let's do the exact opposite. So
I've
making
heard
them
that
6 foot,
heard that
7 foot tall and bulletproof. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard that one before, man, and I know your answer to it because it's just difficult. If you say don't do this and they do it, that's a little bit frustrating, I think. We'll probably take a couple more questions and then we'll wind up because we got plenty of weeks and we got loads of stuff to talk about. But this one is from a friend of mine actually in Massachusetts, Daryl. You may have met my good friend Darren, who was my best man at my wedding. If you remember my best man Darren, this is Daryl, who is his brother, Darren and Daryl. And yes. They hear that question all the time. Their other brother. So Daryl says, how are we working around getting news stories and content to people in the public, right? Because obviously COVID, but also, well, guess what? Hold on to that thought. We'll get back to you. There's your teaser. Sorry, Daryl. We'll get on that later on. Kevin, I think the answer to this one, I'll answer for you. How much was an influence of Daredevil was it in the Turtles? I'm going to answer for Kevin. Quite a lot. It's pretty much where it came from.
Not at all.
Yeah, not at all. Yeah, no, nothing. While you're at the website, join the Kevin Eastman fan club. Sounds good to me. I'm in. And I want to just give a little highlight to what Brett says here. I've actually changed my mind. A Ninja Turtle Judge Dredd crossover would be just about everything. Would that not?
That would be awesome.
It would be incredible, wouldn't it? It would be incredible. We did cover the Who's Your Favorite Turtle. Kevin doesn't have one. He kind of does, but mine is Donatello. But Kevin's is sort of Michelangelo and kind of Raphael. And, it's because they were all very similar when they started.
Raffaangelo.
Yeah. Donardo, yeah. Raffaangelo.
Actually, that Donatello was almost named Bernini, right? You know that.
Really?
Yeah, Peter and I had a discussion early on, when we was like, because, Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael came pretty easy. It was sort of like master, the other master, and then this Raphael was kind of a student of Michelangelo. But I liked, I was a big art history geek, and I liked the sculptor Bernini much better. I thought he was a better sculptor. And so, but Pete liked Donatello. Not just Donatello wasn't a very accomplished sculptor, but it was just sort of like, he said, well, it's got the Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and I was just like, yeah, but Bernini. And so anyway, I wisely listened to Pete, and Donatello became Donatello, but he was almost named Bernini for about 2 weeks.
Imagine that because the whole world, I've often said this, and we'll sort of close on this, right? Because we'll get to other stuff in the future. Kev, one of the things that I always encourage people to do is to stay true to creatively, right? I try to do this with everybody. I know that you've always done that because you and I went through Tundra and we went through Mirage together. And I've seen you encourage people to stick true to what they want to do and help them and fund them and do stuff like that when you did. So here's the deal. When someone tells you can't do something, I often, and people with me at Meta Studios know this, that I'll often point them to the week before you created the Ninja Turtles. And in that week, there were 4 words that you were never going to say next to each other: Teenage, Mutant, Ninja, Turtles. They were never going to exist. And if you'd have pitched them to anybody, the answer would have been no, right? And if you pitch them now and no one had ever heard of it, they would say no. It's always a no. No, I don't believe in it. I don't believe it. But you guys did. You knew it was funny. You knew what it was. So when people say creatively, don't do it, or you shouldn't do it because your audience won't like it, I got to say that I have already seen it work. I was right there when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles became a thing. So everyone should stay really true creatively to what they want to do. And I think that's what you guys did. And from that, came all of this stuff, including these incredible films. Some of them not so incredible, but you know what I mean.
Well, let me flip it back on you in this respect. Is that every single one of what's become the foundation of all things Turtles is those first 15 issues that Peter and I wrote. Those issues are written under one main driving force. Is we wrote those books for us. And we love those books because they were written for us. We weren't intended to write them for anything else. And I would tell you, your favorite stories, I bet, are the ones you wrote without any audience in mind at all. It was like you wrote them because you wanted to see that story told. And you had a vision in your mind. You wrote it for yourself. And that's where the truest and purest vision comes through. And it's like you can't think about, this might sell more if I put a cape on it, or this might work more of this. But am I right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Say again.
No, so your favorite stories are the ones you wrote for yourself. Am I right?
Yeah, I think they're the ones that I wrote about myself to some extent. In other words, I knew what I was writing about. Yeah, no, that's a good point, right? I was writing about myself, and so to some extent they were for myself, but they were very much about myself. And so they were things that I really understood, like, you know, a lot of stories I've written about how I grew up with my brother. Stuff like that has made itself into my work. And that's what makes me those are the things that make me the happiest. I feel they're the best, most accomplished work. So yeah, it's very similar, which is you wrote the thing that you liked. You guys loved it. And then anyone that told you no, and I've used this before, if you tell me I can't do something, that just means that you can't do it. I can do it. Shut up and leave me alone.
No, honestly, just, there's a bit of self-promotion and because it only ties in so specifically is like when, I had this idea for a story which became Drawing Blood with co-creator David Avalone. It was an idea that we showed it to a couple of publishers and they said no. They just basically looked at it. And so we, through the, much like Uncle Quentin in the early forms of crowdfunding, we went to Kickstarter, and I know you've done that route, and we had this tremendous outpouring of support. And then Drawing Blood is probably the closest thing to an original idea that's sort of something written about myself, including myself, that I love, with David. David does all the final scripts, and he's fantastic. But it works because it's in its purest form, and that's what I love. And we'll talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk about that at some other point. But I would just say, like I got here's my sign off on this, right? I'm privileged that I was lucky enough to run into you when I was young, right? And you gave me my first chance in this business, and I've had a chance to then go on to do things. I learned a lot of those lessons working in those days. I learned that anything was possible, that creators should own their stuff. I learned all of these things because that's what we did. That was my first lesson in this business, was watching success in a tiny little town called Northampton, Massachusetts. And if you'd have told us that we couldn't do it, we were already doing it. So shut up, get out of my way, I've already done it, was almost always going to be our answer to everything. So having gone through this, Kevin, and having, been given a chance to write, say, Wolverine's origin or Years of Spider-Man or one of the things I'll never forget is that when I created the Sentry, they rejected me for years. And then I won an Eisner Award with the Inhumans, and they said, what do you want to write? And I said, I want to do that Sentry. And they pissed and moaned at me about doing the Sentry. And guess what? It ended up being a member of the Avengers. So when people say you can't do it, of course you can. And I'm really glad that you did it. And what came out of it was incredible. But man, these films and the joy that they bring to all these people in our stream and all the people watching this, it came because you guys stuck to your guns, and good for you.
No, and in addition to that, and one series of incredibly impossible accidents led me to meeting Peter Laird, and without Peter, the Turtles would not be the Turtles. I know that Peter would have gone on to do things in comics. I would have gone on to do things in comics, as that's our passion. But this creation that has lasted 36 years is the greatest blessing, and that's because I met Peter Laird, and everything that's come from that, and the support of the fans that give us the greatest job in the universe. All the things that we do are, but you got to stick to your guns and then stay true to yourself, and fight the good fight, I guess, because there's really nothing else.
All right. Well, here's how we're gonna end it. In the future podcast, the future broadcast, we're going to be talking about a couple of things. So one of them is going to be we're going to be talking next time about the toys and the cartoons, because that's insane. Find out how Kevin and I actually directed and wrote a Ninja Turtle project together from Nickelodeon. So we actually got to work together on Turtles after all these years, which is really cool. Find out about how the toys were designed and all the crazy stuff in the merchandising. And then in future ones, we're going to talk about some of the behind the scenes that is beyond crazy. I think literally one of our streams is going to be about the craziest shit that ever happened to us, because it's crazy. Also about the really interesting days of like trying to do the comic book publishing company Tundra, which was really complicated and difficult. But we will talk a bunch about Ninja Turtles. We'll talk about my time at Marvel, which was madness, because I was a little punk and I got given a job by Kevin Eastman. And a few years later, I ended up writing like Spider-Man. It was crazy. So, thanks everybody for joining us. We really appreciate you coming here and seeing us. And Kevin, as always, mate, it's a blast.
Been a pleasure. Stay safe out there. Love you, Cowabunga. Can't wait for the next episode, Paul.
Stay safe, everybody.
Love to Melinda and the boys.
See you, mate. Bye-bye.
Cheers.